Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Can somebody confirm this?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. All right, so welcome to the session. This is like an extra session, not like exactly an extra. We generally have this session like every end of the term. So this is basically to just get a glimpse of contents of each week. So we'll be going through a set of slides and just a walkthrough of what we did so far in the course, and certain highlights on what to expect in the form of exam. So just to just a small pointers to for your revision, right? So we are already kind of late for by 3-4 minutes, so I'll share my screen and start the presentation. I'll finish it. In between you can raise your hand, and if there is any doubt, you can raise your hand. We will try to clear it then, or else we'll try to take the your questions or queries in the last. Okay, so just give me a minute. I'll just share the screen. Okay, so the slide is visible, right? First slide.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll move ahead. Yeah, so I'll just tell you the agenda of this session. Basically, we are trying to have a basic walkthrough of the course content. Okay, we'll see through the important concepts that we have seen throughout the course in the course of 12 weeks. And I've just pointed out few things that you have to look at within a week content from the point of view of exam, right? From the point of view of end term, as in what kind of what are the topics from where the questions can come in. All right, so this is the basic agenda of this session. All right, so start with the first week, that is the basics of web. And yeah, so the content as we have seen in the first week is talking about apps in general, right? What is an application? Okay, so we are here. Initially, we started off with talking about basic what an application is. All right. Then we saw the various types of application. Now, what do these types of application come from? So these type of application comes from the platform of these applications, or the platforms on which these applications are built. The platform that we know of is, we know of as in that we have taken as a basis of this course is the web application. But we also know that there are things like GUI application, standalone application as we call it, the applications that we can install in our system and run it without the need of internet. All right, and so these are GUI applications or standalone applications. Then we have things called things like web application, which require web, or which connects us to the outer part of our system, not only are not confined to the system. All right, so putting that in mind, we moved ahead with web as the platform of our application. Then we talked about the various components of application. What are the components of application, right? So generally what we see as an application is it has something that we see, right? The presentation part of an application. All right, something that happens at the background, that is the controller part of an application, the application logic. And while interacting with an application, that is happening, that is what we see in the front, and what happens at the back end, there is some data associated. So to take care of this data, we have a database layer of an application, right? So these are the basic components of an application that we see. The front end that we see, the back end of an application, and the database that it works with. All right, so these are the components of application. Then we came across terms like web architectures. So the web architectures that we saw in this course was the client server architecture and distributed, or so called as peer-to-peer architecture. But the main focus of our application development for this course was to look at the client server architecture, right? Where your machine acts as a client and the server sits on the internet, where you interact with the server, get some data, put some requests, and work your application with. Then going through an application, there can be various ways in which an application can be built, right? So these ways, over the years, with the experience of experience of web developers or application developers, we saw that okay, an application can be distributed into three major components, which I just a few minutes back, which I talked about as the components of an application. Okay, so why not distribute our application and build it individually in that form? Okay, so what I'm talking basically here is the design pattern of an application, the design which has the pattern which is followed to design a particular application, right? So the design pattern that we used throughout the course is MVC, all right, the model view controller, which by the name it suggests that divide your application into three components, one which consists of the database part or the database layer, one which consists of the presentation layer, and the other which consists of the business logic layer. All right, so the model is something that takes care of the base database layer, view takes care of the presentation layer of your application, and controller the business logic layer, right? Now this is the basic content that we saw from the week one. But the things that you need to know that you need to know from the point of examination is what are protocols, right? In general, what a protocol means, how have we evolved, and how have we developed these protocols. Okay, HTTP methods, one of such protocol that we are using is HTTP, right? And what are HTTP verbs, right? So what are HTTP verbs? And they're nothing but the HTTP methods. This is just a synonym of HTTP methods. What we are using, HTTP verbs, right? Get, put, post, delete, patch, etc. All right. We also need to know some of their properties, like whether a method or whether a verb is idempotent or not, whether it is safe or not, right? I've given sources also, which you can go through. It is and most of the times the source that I give is MDN docs, right? So you can go through that documentation of HTTP verbs, and then just open it, and you will see the information about each method. Okay, generally what do we use? We use 2 to 3 methods like get, put, post, and delete, right? We hardly use delete and put, but what we work with mostly is get and post. So it is better for you to know whether a method is get, whether a method get is safe or not, idempotent or not. Same with the post, right? You also need to know the structure of a method. I mean, for example, if you're sending a request to the particular method, what should be the content of a request? Whether a request has a request header, request body, right? How does the response is taken, or what comes as a response? Do we get only body as a response, or do we get also a header and body as a response? This should be known for basic verbs, right? Get, post, put, and delete at least. All right. Then we came across a very conventional way, a very preliminary way of making a request to web, where we did not have the privilege of things like browsers, web browsers, right? So we did not have that kind of interaction with the web back then, right? When the browsers were not there. So how did we use to make uh, connections or requests to a particular website? So that is done with the help of curl, right? It is the basic CLI method to make a request to the web with a particular data to be sent to the web and information to be retrieved to the web, right? So this is something that you need to know. We have seen a lot of questions coming in on curl in your quizzes, right? Then we came across various numericals, right? So things like performance parameters. What is it? The latency and bandwidth. I'm sure you know there are various numerous numericals that can be created on these two concepts, right? And we have discussed a lot of it in week one solve with insta and any numerical type sessions, right? So you need to know what latency is. You need to know what kind of questions can be built on bandwidth. Um, you should go through each of these questions, because you will not find, definitely not find this question as it is in your paper. There will be definitely some changes, some build up on the questions. So having a basic idea of what these bandwidth is, what are the formulas, how are we looking at the units. As I always say while talking about any numerical, the thing that we need to keep in mind is the units, right? Because we deal with various units here. Bandwidth is like gigabits per second, megabits per second, megabyte, gigabyte, kilobit. So many of you get confused with bits and bytes, and this is a very logical confusion. So it is not like there are only few who deal with it. Everyone gets that confusion. So to going through those numerical question will definitely help. And I mean, I bet there will be questions on these things. All right. As I said while talking about curl, things that you need to look at is what is a request and how do we get the response. The content of request and the content of response. What information can you get from a request and what information do you get when there is a response of a particular request? So these are the things that you need to know from week one content, right? Yeah. So that's it about week one. I'll move to the next week. All right. So next week talked about basics of HTML and CSS. Right. So what was the content? There was a lot on information representation. Right. How is the information represented in bits and bytes? Okay. Talking about binary representation and various others. Okay. Then we talked about, okay, you convert a piece of text into binary and then you save it. But is that always an efficient way to save it? Right. From that question comes the understanding of efficiency, as in how do we save data into the how do we save our content into the database more efficiently without wasting bytes or without or making the use of least bytes possible. Okay, so that is how we talk about efficiency. Okay, various encoding techniques have been discussed in week 2 content. Um, but what we need to take home from that, what we need to know from that particular thing is something that I've marked out in things to know, right? Questions, I mean, these are the areas where you will find questions from. There is one thing called as content, but there is other thing that what part of that content has to be looked at carefully. All right, next we talk about markups and its type. All right, so HTML, all right, any tech stack would not leave HTML for their web development. Right. So we'll talk about HTML, HTML5 specifically. And while talking about markups, we talked about three different types of markups from the time they are built. So it's like three different types of markers. What are descriptive marking? What is presentational marking? Right. What is procedural marking? Right. So how it is done, what is the difference between each is something that we saw in HTML. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm just going through what things we saw. If there is any particular thing that you need to understand in detail, you can simply raise your hand and then we'll discuss on that more. All right. Then we talked about basic DOM. All right. So as I said, as I talked about in another in week 11 content, I guess what basically DOM does. It is for not for us to understand. It is for the browser to understand what is the exact structure or the tree structure of an HTML document. How does the browser understand what to render and how to render? All right. So that is done with the help of DOM. Okay, then once the basic skeleton of our application is ready, we go with the designing and providing aesthetics to our application. That is done with the basic CSS, that is vanilla CSS, right? You can use other frameworks like Bootstrap, all right, Tailwind CSS. There are many. Okay, but this is something that is a choice of developer, all right, what he or she wants to use. There can be very interactive designs brought through with the help of simple CSS, and there can be very simpler stylings that can be brought to with the use of Bootstrap also, right? Then finally, we talked about responsive design. What exactly is the responsive design? So responsive design takes care of adjusting your screen with the screen size, right? So you create an application and you want that application to work on different sizes, screens of different form factor. For example, laptops, all right. For example, mobile phones. You want the user to have same user experience while using an application. This is where the term responsive design comes in, because responsive design of an application responds to the size of screen and it adjusts itself. It styles or places or positions the element of an HTML based on the size of screen. Okay, so this is a very important topic that we generally see as a part of basic HTML and CSS generation. What do we need to know from this week? Definitely, we need to know basics of number system. You definitely may have come across various questions that talk about converting from one number system to another. So you should know this conversion. You should be able to convert from binary to octal, octal to decimal, decimal to, and the other way around, right? So all these conversions have to be known uh, by heart. All right. Now we're talking about binary. We see that generally with very basic knowledge of binary system, we have information represented as zeros and ones. All right. But when you talk about numbers, that is not the only case. Why? Because numbers are signed. All right. Now, what do I mean by signed numbers? It's like +5, -3. Right. So there is a sign associated with a number. Now, how do you say that a particular number is positive or negative? Just by saying its binary representation, that is ones and zeros, right? So this is something that you don't have to worry about. Our application, I mean, the course application development is not dealing with signed binary numbers. By default, you have to assume that a number is positive. Okay, even if I mean, if it is not given by default, you have to assume that a number is positive. All right. So that is about binary. Things happen in octal and decimal and hexadecimal also. But understanding decimal numbers is something that we can comprehend very easily, because that is something we have been doing from the time we know what numbers are. All right. But the conversion is something that you need to know. There can be definitely questions on conversions or moving from one number system to another. All right. Talking about HTML in detail, the thing that you need to know is the HTML tags. Okay, what are the type of tags? For example, whether a tag is inline tag, whether a tag is a block tag. Okay, you need to know what kind of tags is. This is not only enhances your positioning of HTML. This also gives a better look to your application without the use of CSS also. So understanding what an element or what a tag does, and what category it belongs to is good to know, right? Then there is CSS. So you give some styling, but there are ways in which you can embed styling to your HTML document. All right. And what are these ways? There are three different ways: inline, internal, and external. All right. So based on their hierarchy, as in the precedence, which one will be given weightage over other, we define styling, right? So the doesn't matter what happens, maximum weightage is given to inline. All right. And talking about internal and external, it depends on where they appear in the document. All right. So if you want to style single element and you want to see what comes as a precedence, the style that appears at the latest will be taken. It's like the latest one is taken, is overrides the other style. Okay, this is the case of internal and external. If by any chance an element has an inline styling, doesn't matter what is the sequence, inline styling will take the precedence. Okay, that is something you need to know. Now there is something called as developer tools. Now developer tools is not only confined to talking about HTML and CSS. It is a broader thing, but I just wrote it here because you may have remember while talking, while discussing on week 2 solve with instructor session, developer tools help a lot in ideally understanding the position and how things will get rendered using HTML and CSS, right? Because whatever changes you do in a developer tool, that will directly be seen in front of you on the screen, that will directly appear. So you don't have to make hard coded changes in the code in your actual document. Just see what is happening there. Once you are satisfied with particularly positioning a content, then you can use the stylings that appear, and then you can add it in the actual document. All right. So if you are getting confused on what I'm speaking here, just go through the week 2 content and solve with instructor content, and you sorry. So please get the slide posted in the portal. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So this slide will go to the portal as soon as we're done with this session. Okay. Yeah, and the previous one also, I'll update all the slides. All right, so this is something that we need to know about developer tools. Now, when this is about HTML and CSS. When we go ahead with creating servers using Python, when we go ahead with embedding JavaScript into our system, developer tools have a major role there, because then they talk about the actual content of the page, then they talk about the request response cycle, then they talk about the status code, then they talk about the form data, all these cookies, sessions, right? What the network is using, waterfall, things like that. So developer tools, that is why we call it developer tools, because it gives you a lot of information on what exactly is happening on the page. All right, so this is something you need to know from week 2 content. I'll move ahead. Yeah, so the week 3 content was based on presentation layer, the view part of MVC design pattern. All right, and we saw things like user interface versus user interaction. All right, so what is user interface versus user interaction? Right, so user interface is something that you're looking at the screen, okay, that you see when you look at the screen. That is user interface. Okay, user interaction is the way in which you provide data to the application. So there is a very subtle difference between these two, but there is actually a difference. User interface, you will not be able to, by the name suggests, right? Interface will not allow you to interact with the application. It will show you what is there with the application. Interaction will allow you to interact with the application. For example, I'm using this system, right? My laptop and my mouse. So it has a keyboard and it has a screen. What I can see is the content of week 3, that is presentation layer, that is view. That is something I cannot change unless I have a keyboard and mouse. So my user interaction devices are keyboard and mouse, but my user interface is the screen of this laptop, right? So there is a small difference between these two. Then we talked about types of view. What exactly are the types of view? Whether a view is completely static, that is not changing with time, doesn't matter you visit it today, tomorrow, after years, right? That is the static view. It doesn't change with the time it is accessed, all right? But then there is something called as dynamic view, okay? A view that is changing with time, a view that is changing with the input, a view that is changing with the data, right? So that is a dynamic view. Now, what percentage of your screen is dynamic and what percentage of it is static categorizes the other types of view. That is partly dynamic, partly static, right? So that is all. So partly dynamic and partly static are views which are somewhere between completely static and completely dynamic views. You cannot definitely have a completely dynamic view because it will have a lot of things that is happening or a lot of things changing, right, which we do not generally see in any application, doesn't matter what level of application it is. Okay, then we talk about things like user interface design. That's what. So when we have user interface and interaction, we know what a user interface is. That is how a user will look at how the user will see the application when it is in front of it, right? So what should be given? Aesthetics must be given, accessibility, how easily it is able to access, right? So that is something we talk about in designing a user interface. So this is a very detailed content that we have given in as a part of course. Then we talk about Jacob-Nielsen heuristics, right? So these are Jacob Nielsen's heuristics are the rules, not exactly the rules, are what we can say suggestions made for a proper for a conventional presentational design, right? For a conventional user interface design. Following those principles, we can have a very good interface design. Does it mean that do we have to follow it every time? Definitely not. But that is something which is like a convention that we should follow. Okay. Now these are some theoretical aspects of week 3. But what we need to exactly know, what comes as a part of comes as a part of practical component is template creation. Right. Week 3 was more of creation of templates. Now, how do we create template? We have various tools. We have PyHTML, we have inbuilt Python string module, and we have Jinja 2. All right. I've added template designer documentation for you to go through it because it is a very important piece of information that we also refer for creating questions. All right. Then we talked about a very useful concept of Jinja filters. All right, and then there is a very important concept of template inheritance. Template inheritance is something which I would recommend you all to use in your project. Why? Because your project will have various number of pages, various number of views, right? Templates. Now there will be a lot of it which will um, be repeating every time you load a page. For example, you have a dashboard on the top, which gives the header information, your name, uh, everything, your name, whether you are logged in or logged out, whether you are an accepted user, authenticated user or not, whether you are a new user, things like that. So information which is going through in and throughout your application, doesn't matter what page you move in. So these are the things which will stay on the screen, doesn't matter what page you are in. So why to create them again and again, why to load them again and again, right? So template inheritance is inheriting some part of the base template, which will never change even if you change pages of your application, right? So the point number 5 and 6, Jinja filters and template inheritance, is something that you should go through in detail. All right. Then um, yeah, so we have template creation. Again, I'll come back to point number 1 and 2. So we can create templates using PyHTML and string module of Python, only that they are very limited in use. Okay, you cannot create a very dynamic view with the help dynamic templates or view with the help of PyHTML and string. But yeah, this is something should be used. Then the what we say, the important part or the important template creation engine that we should use, that we will use, that will add dynamicity to our page to a lot extent, is Jinja 2, right? This is something that we have been using in all our practical sessions. All right, so these are the things that you need to take home from the week 3 content. Okay, before moving ahead, a question. Yeah, so talking about Jinja filters, there are, I guess, I don't know, there are more than 20, but don't have to go through all 20. I guess some of them are taken in session. Just go through them. If there is any filter in question, go through them. Okay, nothing out of that will come. If a filter is taken in a question, activity, practice graded, those and the ones taken in session. All right, you don't have to go through the entire set because there are many. Yeah, I understand that. Having the knowledge of all will not be uh, feasible. All right, so a handful of Jinja filters is something that you should look at. Okay, so this is about week 3. So I'll move ahead. Yeah, so this is the M part of our MVC, that is a database layer, or what we call as model. All right. So yeah, so model is like a mini data DBMS systems we are learning in Aptiv 1, right? Uh, Talking about persistent storage, mechanisms for persistent storage, relational databases, what relational databases are, what unstructured databases are. Okay, why do we call relational databases as SQL, and what is NoSQL, right? So these are the things that we generally see as a part of, or as a basic part of DBMS course. But why do we need them here? Because database plays a very important role in application development. As you can see, it is 1/3 of an application, M. All right. So having a basic knowledge of database layer is important. All right. Then we have relation and its types. So something that I would recommend you to have a hold on or grip on is relationships. Okay, how do you form one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many relationship between your models, right? One-to-one is okay, you don't have to worry about it. But there are two relationships specifically that are very important. You can expect lot many questions: one-to-many and many-to-many. All right. So I won't go into much details of content, but yeah, things to know. You should know basic SQL queries. Okay, as you may have observed, quiz 1, quiz 2 are like there were questions on SQL. Although we have tried on your request that we will not be going into details of queries, which is a fair assumption, that fair assumption to have. Okay, while having app dev course, that okay, you don't have to go to that depth of DBMS queries, but okay, some basic queries. ER diagrams are important because this will help you in creating your report of the project, right? ER diagrams will actually give the information of what models you have created in the project, right? So while creating the report, this is something that we expect you to have in the report, the ER diagram stating the relationship between the models. All right. Basic wildcards. Why we are talking about wildcards? Because this simplifies our search, right? So basic wildcards are again expected to know, because you may have seen questions on that, and this is not a very wide topic, very vast topic. You can find it through, just search it on web, and you'll see there are a handful of wildcards which you need to know, and they are not very confusing also. Now, this is something that you need to know ORMs, right? Although many of you go with not using ORMs, that is absolutely fine, no issues with it. But as a part of course content, as a part of Viva, you can expect questions from ORMs, right? So what it is, how is it different from conventional connectivity of database with your application? What additional features it is providing? What are advantages, disadvantages? These are something you should know. Okay, the practical aspect of it is something that we'll see when we'll talk about Flask, right? So just basic of ORM is something that you know at week 4 level. All right, next I'll move to week 5. Now this is the real deal, right? We talk about application creation from week 5. This is where the Flask comes in. All right, so before that we'll go to the actual content. What did we see as a part of controllers? So MVC design pattern at the here is like completing its entire circle. We're talking about all the components. This is where we talk about the last component, that is C of the MVC. All right, the controllers. What exactly are the controllers? So the controllers are that part of your application that contain business logic of your application. Now, what is the difference between any logic or a business logic, right? So business logic is actually taking care of the functional requirement of your application. All right, the intended requirement of your application. Why have you created this application at the first place? This is the question. So the answer would be, just go through my controller, you'll get to know. All right, so business logic layer is something that is taken care of by the controllers. All right, so this is where we create servers, right? The server part of our application, the backend part of our application, which will deal with the data that comes through front end. All right, so here we will deal with a lot of requests and create a lot of different types of responses. All right, now what is exactly the business logic? What are the components of a business logic? So what are the components? CRUD operations. Basically, you perform CRUD operations to do a particular task. Doing that particular task uh, does the business logic for you. So what are the components of business logic? The CRUD operations. You should be able to implement all the CRUD operations for whatever it is, like wherever they are asked. All right, then we have things like routes and controllers. Definitely. So while defining a server, while defining a URL, while defining an endpoint, you should know what function runs at what URL. That is, what functions get mapped with what URL. This is very important because these URLs are the trigger points of these functions. These URLs are are like performing the calling of this function, right? So these are something that we need to know about the content of week 5. But as far as the practical part of this week is concerned, we need to know basics of Flask. Now what does a basic of Flask mean, right? So you should be able to instantiate a Flask app, right? Very important. The first page of what you see in the Flask documentation, a minimal app. All right, so you should be able to create a minimal app. All right, instantiate a Flask object, naming it DB, Flask underscore name, everything, things like that, right? Basic routing. What do we have while routing? The app.route decorator. So you should be able to do that. Create routing. You should be able to give variables to the routing with the help of converters like integer, string, path, etc. Right? That should be something that you should know. Once the routing is done, some information, some controller part is done within. At the end of that particular view function, what should happen? Whether a template is rendered, whether it is redirected to another URL, whether we are giving some error. So these are the things that you should know, right? So you should be able to render templates with Jinja. You should be able to redirect to another URLs, and you should also be able to handle errors, right? Now, why error handling is important? Error handling is important to customize the error page that you see when something happens at the backend, right? For example, if you have a URL that does not exist, what it should show? It should show 404 error, right? The page is not found, URL is not found, right? Now, this is a very generic message that the server sends, all right, which is not at all intuitive if a very amateur person or a person who is having a minimal knowledge of application is looking at the application, right? Now you want to customize a page, error page, and give actual, what we say, the error that makes some sense to that particular user, right? So customizing the error page, the conventional error that the Flask or any server throws, customizing into an application and making it useful or comprehensible by the user is something you do with error handling, right? It is not a very deep concept, but it is very useful in terms of creating a intuitive application. All right. Now with the Flask in place, and with the Flask in place, you might want to deal with a lot of data, right? So this is where things like Flask SQL comes in, and this is what the practical part of ORM is, right? So you should be able to instantiate a DB same as you are able to instantiate an application, right? Once the DBs or the object DB is instantiated, you should be able to configure it to database. So these are like 1 or 2 lines code, but play a very important role when you actually work with the application, right? Creating models and establishing relationship. Now, creating models is okay. These models can individually, independently coexist in the database, but establishing relationship is a bit tricky because we need to know what kind of relationship we are establishing, whether it is one to many or many to many. So understanding the subtle differences that we have while creating or establishing relationship is a good to know, right? This will also help you with the questions. Okay, so this is about the week 5 content. Flask basics and Flask SQL alchemy is something that you have to take home from this week. Next is it's like something which has not been really clear, but this is a very important. Yeah, somebody speaking.
On the redirection part, I think we face some practical issues, right? So redirect for URL if you give something specific, right? And then sometimes the web page doesn't load, you have to click. So of course, that is most in programming, but theoretically, you just need to know that redirect means you have to give the URL name and that's it, right? Or is there anything else?
Correct. So redirecting is, see, basically working with application, it is all dealing with URLs. So you should be able to jump from one endpoint to another. Redirecting allows you to do that. That's it. That is the.
So we don't have to worry about the specific 200 return code and all the stuff. That is where the programming time we got some issues, practical issues.
Okay, yeah, but you don't have to worry about it because the that is the thing with the redirecting. So when redirection happens, it shows the status code 302. Okay, but 302 is actually not the status code of your response. Okay, generally we deal with status code of the response. Generally we should check the status code of the response. If the response is response was available, it could retrieve response, it will show 200. Otherwise it will show depending on what it was, 404, 400, 500, depends on that. Okay, so that status code which follows the 302 is something that matters. Yeah, right.
Okay, so
all right. Yeah, so yeah, general redirection is jumping from one URL. So presently that function, that particular view function ran because you went to certain URL. Now from that URL, you don't want to return anything. You don't want your web application to show anything on the page. It should go to another URL. Now what that URL does is out of the scope of this redirection. Okay, so yeah, with that I'll move ahead. All right, so yeah, APIs and REST. Okay, so talking about APIs, we generally started with what are APIs. Okay, and APIs are not simply application programming interface. It is more than that, right? So application programming interface is like, just understand that you are creating an application, but you don't want to exactly talk about the business logic of that application. Rather, you want to use the business logic of that application from another already existing application. All right. Now you cannot bring the entire application to you. Okay, because that application might have another things. What is important to you is that particular business logic which you're looking for. Okay, APIs provide you to shake that hand. Okay, APIs provide you for that path which will allow this particular user to retrieve that piece of business logic from another application to their application. Okay, this is what APIs do. Okay, concept of API design is something that we saw with the help of Flask RESTful. All right, then we saw things like REST architecture, representational state transfer. All right, and then there are around 5 to 6 constraints which it provides. It is like again, you don't have to follow REST principles, but this is something which has been observed and brought out good results for creating an application, right? Then we talked about REST APIs. So normal APIs, APIs that follow REST are REST APIs, is something that we saw. And then we talked about Open API. So there are some specifications with which Open API give. All right. Now Open APIs are APIs that are, it's like open source, right? They are available to you. Just use them and use in your application and retrieve the data. Okay. Now, API and its relationship with the CRUD. What is this? This is what I tried to say with the first statement when I started week 6. So it's like business logic. Okay. What is CRUD? CRUD is a components of business logic. Okay. Doing CRUD operations here and there will give you the actual business logic. Now, you don't want to do that, but you want to take the already done code. So that is what APIs do. APIs bring this CRUD operation, this set of CRUD operations to you and allow you to use them as your business logic. All right. So these are the minimal content of that of what we saw in week 6. All right. But what we need to know, as we saw Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy, this is something that we need to know when API is coming. Flask RESTful, right? So this is again an extension of Flask, which provides you various functionalities to create, use, and document APIs. Right? Not exactly document, but yeah, you can create and use and map them. All right. So talking about Flask RESTful, what you should know, you should be able to do a resourceful routing. Okay, what is resourceful routing? It's like creating a route, creating a function, assign it a HTTP verb, and give it an endpoint later. All right, what did we do in Flask? We gave the endpoint first and mapped what should happen when this particular endpoint is hit. In creating an API, what we do, we create the controller or what we call a view function first with the particular method, and then map these methods with the URL, right? So that is the routing. Okay, routing a resource so that you can use in your application. Okay, now there are various places where you might want to also provide data along with your request, along with the request body, right? How do you provide this data? With the help of argument parsing. Okay, so you provide data. How is this data understood and processed at the server end, right? So this data has to be parsed at the server. So how that parsing should be done given the data is something that you should know, right? Then mapping endpoints. As I said, once you create the controller, then you map this controllers with the URLs, with the endpoints. So that mapping should be crystal clear. And then there are cases where we do not want. So there is you load the data with the help of API, but APIs give you more than what was required. All right. Also in not the format that you wanted. All right. Just so you want to format this output and filter out some of those outputs. Okay. How to do that? With the help of fields and Marshall width. All right. So you should be able to use fields. How are you creating fields that are useful to you, and how are you marshalling it with a particular controller, right? Particular constructor in your API class. All right. This is something you should know with Flask RESTful. Apart from this is up to you to what extent you want to go, but this is the minimum required things that one might expect when you say that, okay, I know Flask RESTful. All right. Now, once your APIs are created, you need to document them so that one can test APIs, whether these APIs are returning the result as they claim, right? So you should be able, because see, APIs do not have an interface. Okay, APIs are something that happen from one background of one application to background of another. How do you test APIs? So for that, you should be able to document your APIs so that the user before actually incorporating the API should be able to test whether this API is working for me. right? So what do we use? We use Swagger UI and Insomnia. All right. How do we create the documented file? With the help of YAML. Okay. Do I really need to know how to write code in YAML? No, I don't have to, because the sample code that they give will give you enough understanding of, okay, how an endpoint is created and rendered by the same UI. All right, the Swagger UI or Insomnia UI. And what you need to do, just replace the root URL, the actual API endpoints with yours. Okay, so you don't need to know the YAML. All right. Now this is one way of documenting and testing APIs. There can be another way of documenting, testing, and also loading your APIs within the application. All right. So let's say I want to use the application within my controller, and I don't want to write any business logic because the API that I want to use provides the business logic. How do I load this API within my application? Okay. So one way of doing that is using a request library. Okay. Request library. Apart from apart from documenting an API, you should be also able to test whether a particular API is giving correct answer or not. Okay. And you don't have much idea about the Swagger UI and Insomnia. You don't want to deal with the YAML files. You don't want to get into headaches of how is it is rendering or not. So the best way to do that is using curl and Postman, right? So as I said, curl is used to make requests to a particular URL. Now that URL can be any. It can be a simple HTTP URL or a resource of a particular resource API URL. Okay, so it can be any URL. So to one simple way of testing an API is using curl, and the other thing is Postman. Postman is like just providing an interface to you uh, to run an API with a particular method and see what it returns, right? So these are not the interfaces of an application. These are just interfaces which run APIs behind. All right. Along with Postman, you also may have heard about Thunder Client, which is an extension in VS Code. You don't have to worry about it, but this is something. These are some useful tools which will help you to test the APIs to see whether a particular API is giving proper results or not. All right. So these are the things you should know for the practical aspects of week 6. Right. Okay. I'll move ahead. Yeah. Then comes the backend systems, right? So backend system is again talking about the hardware component of some hardware component of the server, right? What is the memory? How is it stored? What is the organization? All right. How should the data be searched? Whether it is using any algorithm, whether it is directly taking one by one. Okay. How are these applications scaled into a larger applications, right? So these are the things that we saw in backend systems: memory hierarchy, computer organization, various methods of searching database. Okay. Now these searching mechanisms depend on what kind of database we have, whether we have SQL database or no SQL database. So talking about again, so we'll come to, whenever we'll deal with database, we'll also deal with what kind of storage it is, right? Then we also saw the memory or the storage components like latency, things like throughput, right? So these are the things that we generally saw when we talked about memory. All right. Then what are the things that we practically need to look at? Okay, things to know for backend system is definitely you should have understanding of algorithmic complexities. You don't have to don't have to know about various algorithms. Okay, you don't need to know what algorithm does what are the names of algorithm, what is tree, things like that. You don't need to know. Just need to know, okay, this is certain algorithm and what kind of numericals can be built on these algorithms. All right. Quiz 2 may have given you some idea of, okay, what kind of numericals you'll see or you can see on algorithms, right? And then there are things like double data rate. Again, I'm just mixing things here because I'm talking about retrieval of data with the use of algorithms and using some terminologies that are used while saving the data. So double data rate is actually a concept or a terminology used for storing data in the hard disk, right? HDD. So double data rate refers to how many bits are written per second, or how many bits are written with each clock cycle. Per second is a larger term, each clock cycle. All right. So what is a clock cycle? Everything happens with trigger, right? Each trigger creates a digital wave of voltage plus minus, right? So a tip of one positive and negative cycle is called a clock cycle. All right. Now this clock cycle triggers a lot of things. One of that is writing bits on the data or the disk. All right. So that's what we mean with the double data rate. So whenever somebody says double data rate, it means that with each clock cycle, there will be 2 bits simultaneously written on the data on the hard disk, right? So that is something you need to know. And yeah, how these numericals are based on the algorithmic complexities. You should know big O notations. All right. How do you understand when a particular big O notation is given, whether it is n square, n log n. So it's nothing but some manipulations in mathematics. That's it. All right. That is something that you need to know as far as the practical component of week 7 is concerned, where you can actually expect questions. Okay, this is about backend. So with backend, we'll move to the application front end. All right. So as you can see, as we move ahead with the content, we will go into more of a theoretical part coming out of the practical aspect or the actual practical part. All right. So application front end is not actually is not actually theoretical here, but it is not theoretical as far as application development is concerned, but it can be theoretical when we are talking about application development one, right? Because we have very briefly introduced JavaScript, not even introduced, we just said that, okay, you're using Python, but okay, there is an alternative called as JavaScript, right? So this is just a theoretical part as far as app dev 1 is concerned, right? So we'll just get introduced to the application front end, what is asynchronous actions that happen, right? So AJAX stand for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. All right. So you don't have to worry about what it does and how it does, because detailed of it is seen in AppDev 2. We'll work with these type of things very often there. All right. Then we have things like WebAssembly. What is WebAssembly actually? So WebAssembly is something that it breaks the shackle of creating your code only in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and things like that. All right. So a developer are very good at logic, very good at creating, having ideas, but do not know JavaScript. So should he not create applications? That's not the thing, right? Now, developer very good with languages like C, C++ should be able to create the application. So what it does is you create your application in C, it will convert it into something that is a browser can understand. So something working like a JavaScript, which works on the browser, right? So these are like more of the theoretical concepts that we generally see when we are talking about application front end for this course. All right. Then there are security implications. Why do we talk about security implications here? Because till now we had JavaScript. Till now we had HTML, which was working on browser, CSS, which was working on browser. These are front end stuff, right? These technologies were something that the user or the client was dealing with. JavaScript works within the browser, as in it works on the front end as well as back end. So the limitations that the JavaScript has is beyond HTML and CSS, right? The access that JavaScript can have to the data is something that HTML and CSS can never have. So using JavaScript with the application will have security implications because JavaScript can modify the data in the database, right? It is working as a backend language. So you can imagine that it is having the complete it is having the complete hold of what is being created at the server side. So this is where security implications come in. How do we prevent that? What type of access, how much access do we give to JavaScript is something that is taken care of in security implications. All right. What do we need to know as far as as far as application front end is concerned for the practical aspect? So you don't need to know much. You need to know the DOM and DOM manipulations with the help of JavaScript. That's it. Okay. Even the browser client operation, client side computation is something that you can go through, but you can expect questions on DOM manipulations with JavaScript. All right. This is only to give you an understanding of JavaScript works. We are not testing your skill in JavaScript, definitely, but this is just to give you a glimpse of what JavaScript does, and how, talking about, okay, dynamic JavaScript provide dynamicity, JavaScript provide dynamicity. Why do we keep on saying that? This is because we don't have to go to HTML to change the HTML exactly, right? DOM manipulation. As I said, HTML is directly linked with DOM, and manipulating DOM will directly manipulate the HTML. That is what JavaScript does, right? So that is why we expect you to understand briefly what is DOM manipulation. Okay. Yeah. So this is something you should know from week 8. Next is an important concept, that is application security, right? Theoretically, it is okay that you need to know, okay, what is discretionary, mandatory, role based, attribute based access control. You need to know, okay, how are these different from other. You need to know what is web based mechanism, I mean, how token based security is provided. Yeah, practically you don't need to. Why? Because these things have been taken care of in mat 2. Okay, we don't need to really worry about token based, because we deal with APIs are not only confined with creating the business logic, they can also provide you a lot of security, right? So again, accessing an API which are secured, which are what we say, which are secured with token, or with secured with certain mechanism, have to be dealt with. So this is something that you'll see in application development 2 in detail. Okay. Week 9 deals with an extra S with HTTP, right? So HTTPS is like a secure socket layer that adds on the protocol, which tries to secure your relation or secure your connection between the client and the server. Okay, it prevents the data being taken from between. Okay, so that is what it tries to do with. That is what we are trying to do with HTTPS. All right. Application logging. Okay, logging is important. Why? Because it gives you the status of what exactly is happening step by step with the application, right? So for example, when we run an application and we see, okay, we hit number of URLs, we go here and there, we redirect from one place to another, all these things are being logged on the console. Why is that important? You know why is that important, right? Because while creating an application, you might have taken the help of that log data so as to understand, okay, what is actually happening with my application, what exactly is the error that is coming. Okay, so you don't need to run your application on debug mode always. Why? Because logging is taking care of that. So it is very important concept. Okay, now what you need to know, or what you need to understand practically from application security, you should understand basics of session management and cookies. What are sessions? What are cookies? All right. um, I mean, what purpose do they serve when you use when you incorporate session management in your application? All right. Again, we have an extension with Flask to take care of this session management, that is Flask login. Right. So while working with Flask login, you may have come across concepts of user mixin. Okay. Secret key is a very important concept, because it what we say, it encrypts your data, session data, and stores it into the session. All right, so that the server and the another user don't see it, but it stays within the server, or it stays within the browser, so that you don't have to re-enter your password and your data every now and then. All right, but it is done in an encrypted form. So there must be something, I mean, there has to be some way where it is encrypted. All right, and to make sure that it is encrypted with a certain security level, we have secret key. All right, and then in Flask login, we may have come across a very important decorator, that is login required. Why? Because login required, when any controller is decorated with login required, it will not allow the user to simply go to the URL and go to this particular page. All right. For example, I'll just give you a test use case. For example, I know what URL will lead to what controller. Okay. So if I know the URL, I can simply type it on the URL bar and go to that particular URL. Okay. And I don't even have to bypass, I mean, I don't even have to put the login credentials. Okay. So if I do not have login required decorator, it will directly lead me to the content without having to without having to log in on the login page. Okay, but if that particular controller on that particular URL is decorated with login required, it will not allow to do so. It will directly redirect me to the login page. Right. So this is something I guess you may have seen as a part of week 9 Solver instructor session. All right. Again, HTTPS is something that you need to know, and login, right? As I said, what are now with logging, you may also see that, okay, so certain things are logging only just for your information. Certain things give you warning. Certain things give you, warning of different levels, right? So for that, we have defined levels of logging, and what levels show what type of warnings and what type of warning they log on the console is something that you need to know from logging levels. All right, so these are the practical aspects of week 9 security, right? So you need to know session management and Flask login as an extension. This is very important as far as week 9 or security is concerned. All right, okay. So now working with security, this is something that you can put in after your application is created. You have checked everything, but there is something called as testing, which happens right from the idea of creating an application to the point of deploying an application. All right, so testing an application, and you, I mean, working with your lab assignments and all, you have done testing, you may have done testing hundreds of times. All right, create a controller and try to run and see what it gives. Create a controller, run and see what it gives. Right, that is a kind of functional testing that you have been performing. Right, so what did we see in the content? We saw all the WH of the testing. Okay, this WH is when do we need to perform testing, why do we need to perform testing, what should we test, and when should we test. All right, there is one there is one question which is not WH, it is verbal, that is how do we perform testing. Right, so these are the things that we saw as the content of testing. All right, and then there are types of testing, that is static testing, dynamic testing, white box text testing, black box, gray box, regression, functional, non-functional. These are all theoretical concepts. These are all theoretical part. You don't have to worry about it. There will not be a question that, okay, tell me which of this is the following testing. We don't generally get questions like that, but this is for your information that, okay, what kind of testing is generally performed. Okay, let us try to answer the WHs. Okay, what should we test? We should test the functional part of the application. We should test the non-functional part of the application. Functional, as I said, okay, whether an endpoint is giving the required result or not. Non-functional, whether this icon is appearing on the bottom right of my screen or not. Right, doesn't matter whether that icon is, it will not affect the functionality of my application, but it will affect the appearance. That's why we call it non-functional. Okay, and testing that whether it is happening or not is non-functional testing. All right, then there are why do you test? To see that your application is performing well and integrating, and also doing the intended task. Right, it is performing the business logic that you wanted it to do. Right, that's why we do the testing. When do we test? At every stage, as I said while starting, from the idea of application to the deployment of application. At every stage, testing should happen. All right, what should be tested is done. When, how do you test? You have various methods. Like one of it is very important that I've given in things to know, that is testing application with the help of request library. Right, so this is something that we also use as our what we say, as our evaluation script. Right, so we test your application with the help of whether your applications, whether a particular URL is giving this result or not, with the help of this type of testing. All right, then we saw levels of testing. Unit testing, whether a single controller is working properly, is a unit testing, because that is unit controller. All right, so and now integration testing, whether two controllers in combination working properly. Okay, how do you connect two controllers? Using redirect, right? So when you redirect the output of one controller to another and you get 200 status, okay, it seems that, okay, integration testing is working fine. Integration, okay, testing is working fine, because here you integrated two units and then saw that the application is giving, sorry, that particular set of controller is giving a right answer. All right, then we have system level testing. Your entire application, right, when you run python space app.py, Is everything working fine? That is your system level test. Okay, then we have coverage. Okay, so don't have to worry about this part a lot, because coverage is like taking care whether a particular statement of the code, a function of the code, a branch of the code, or the conditions of the code are covered or not. Okay, so there are 4 types of coverage: functional, statement, conditional, and branch. Okay, so these are, so it's like it takes care of what is being covered when a particular test case is given. You don't have to worry about that much. Don't have to go into detail about that much. You might have seen some questions on it, but okay, as a part of content, it is there. So okay, it is there. All right, what you need to take from this week, you need to know how test generation is made, that is using pytest, right? Simple test generation is a simple assert statement also. You can assert and see whether the condition that follows a assert statement is coming or not. If it is returning true or false, doesn't matter, but that is a simple test generation. Okay, then we have created, I mean, not we, then the Python has created an extension of it so that you can create test cases. All right, so that is using pytest module, right? Now if you want to test a single unit, you create a unit test, that is with the help of single test underscore xyz function. You want to create a set of tests using fixtures, right? You use the decorator like at the rate pytest.fixtures something. I don't remember the exact syntax, but that is something you do, right? When you want to test a number of test cases at the as a set. Okay, then there are conventions. So conventions as in what do we call as okay, what can we call as convention? Okay, convention is, okay, how should this particular test be performed? Okay, what should we consider as true? What should when should we consider a test is passed? When okay, sorry, when should we consider a test as passed? Okay, so these conventions are something that you define by yourself. Okay, these are all the part of pytest. Okay, so you need to have a basic knowledge of creating test cases and work with it. All right, now these test cases is it's like it's not related to any web application. All right, so you I mean, you create a function and see whether that function is working properly or not, but that the function doesn't really have to be a web app, right? So pytest is not only confined to web app, but when you want to test a Flask application or APIs using request library is very, what we can say, it is a conventional way, is a good way of testing Flask application, because it okay, it receives or stores the response of a particular URL in the form of a response object. All right, so you send, for example, I use curl and I put URL with that. Whatever comes as a response body, I'll get directly on the console. Okay, but using a request library, what we can do is we can send um, some information. I mean, we can send a request using a particular method to a URL and store the response as a response object. Now, what we have to do with the response object, how do we test that response object depends on us, right? So that is how we create test cases. Okay, that is how a Flask application can be tested. Okay, so this is the practical aspect of week 10. All right, now up to week 10 we can see a lot of practical things that come in, and we have already done with the help of live sessions, screencasts and stuff. Okay, but if I move forward, we have week 11 and week 12. So this is something that I don't want to go into much detail. I don't want you also to put a lot of attention on as far as the end term is concerned. Why? Because these are more of a practical, these are definitely a very practical concepts, but we have dealt with it in the theoretical way. All right, we haven't gone into much of the details of deploying an application or talking about JavaScript frameworks and all, right? So these are all the basic theoretical content. That's why I've taken both the contents of both the weeks together. All right, so I'll start with week 11. So week 11, I mean, we had a session and we saw that it is talking about evolution of markups, writing from the various, writing from things like SGML, which is not exactly a markup, but it is a rules or a setup of creating a markup, right? Setup of how a markup should be. Okay, and then there are various markups that actually follow or SGML principle. That's why we call them as application of SGML, right? Things like XML, XHTML, HTML4, these are proper SGML applications. All right, HTML5 is not. All right, there are various reasons. One of that which you may have also seen and known is HTML5 has its own parsing rules, right? A simple statement does the job. Okay, then we have JavaScript. As I said, so JavaScript we studied because we wanted to know why JavaScript should be incorporated as a part of technology or tech stack of web application development, and what does it provide? What is actually a JavaScript? So JavaScript is nothing but a high level programming language similar to Python. So what Python was doing as a web server, same thing JavaScript will do. The only thing is JavaScript also runs on browser, so it can add a lot of dynamic content to my browser. That's it. All right. With that, why to create everything from the scratch using JavaScript? Why not use frameworks, right? Why not use already written code and incorporate them, import them in our application and use them, right? So that's why we that's why we talk about things like JavaScript frameworks. All right. Now there are some frameworks that work on front end, the browser side, the client side of an application, and some frameworks that work on the backend or the server side of an application. So depending on what functionalities they provide, where exactly they work, we have differentiated these frameworks. All right. Examples of these front-end frameworks is like Vue.js, right? This is something that is an important stack of app dev 2. We'll talk about React.js. All right. Then we have AngularJS. So these are the three front-end frameworks. Backend frameworks is uh, sorry, I'm forgetting the name. Starts with N, right?
Node.js.
Node.js. Yeah. Yeah. So Node.js is a very important backend framework. Okay. So what it does is exactly why do we call it as an important backend framework? Because as we talk about JavaScript, JavaScript is something that works with the browser on the client side, right? It works behind the browser and does the job with the help of JavaScript engines. Okay. But if I want to differentiate this code from the application front end and see what is happening on the console, just the way Python is doing, right? By whatever happens on the backend side is available on the console or the Python console when we are using Python. Same thing should happen with JavaScript, right? Currently, whenever I want to see a JavaScript code, where do we see it? We see it in the developer tool console. All right. So whenever I embed a JavaScript code in my HTML and run that HTML, I will see the actual JavaScript content in the console tab of my developer tool. Why? Because that is running in the browser. I want this part to come as a terminal of my code editor, okay, or my CLI. Okay, this is where Node comes in. Node allows me to run JavaScript on the console. Okay, that's why we can call it a proper backend framework. Okay, so this is about frameworks that we saw. Then there are things like web components, right? So what are the web components? You should be able to create custom elements of HTML. Okay, this is one of the web component. There are things like shadow DOM. Okay, shadow DOM, what is shadow DOM? Nothing but just understand it this way. Shadow DOM allows you to separate out the actual styling content of HTML with the actual skeleton of the HTML. Okay, and then there are very important things, templates, which we have been studying from throughout the week 1 to week 6 7. All right, right? So these are the templates. So these are the three web components that we talked about. All right, this is something which we saw in week 11. Okay, practical aspect, don't really have to worry about it. There was one practical aspect, that is DOM manipulation, which we have already covered in week 8 content, right? So next and the last part is application deployment. All right, so what things did we see in application deployment? Okay, so the first thing that we saw was the stages of an app before deployment. So what do we see, what do we talk about when we think of an application? Or I don't have deployment in my mind currently. What do I have? I have a simple small idea. All right, okay, this app can be created. Okay, and I start creating that application using my local host, right? I use the simple editor, things like VS Code, Sublime Text, everything. I do that. Then I embed that application with my database, use controller, use MVC design pattern, everything I do that. I create the entire application in my single machine, which I use as local development environment, right? The local development environment or the local machine. Okay, this is all these things are happening in the single machine where you as a developer and you as a user can see it, right? Now you want this application to use or to be used from multiple machines. Okay, so what you do, you get this application available to multiple machines, right? So this is like simple deployment. All right, deploying your application so that others can use your application. All right, now once this application is already deployed, we need to have this application running, right? Because if I run this application on my local machine and I allow this application to be used by my friends, let's say I give my IP to that friend, and okay, you can put this IP and use my application. But how long is this possible? If I close my system, my server is gone, right? So I need to have dedicated servers which are on 24/7, right? For this application to be accessible at any point of time, because I don't know when or where my friend is using it, right? So I need to have dedicated servers which are on. Now to keep my dedicated servers switched on 24/7, I need to have proper internet connection and proper uninterrupted power, right? These are things that are happening during when the application is deployed. So we're talking about the second point, stages of an app when it is deployed. All right, so initially I have an idea, I develop an application on the local host, and then once done, I deploy it. Once it is deployed, to keep it running, I need to have dedicated servers. This is where we deploy an application on external host, right? We buy the domain name and stuff like that, right? So we buy domain name, host our application there so that not students, everyone can access my application at any point of time. All right, and it doesn't have to, I don't really have to have my laptop or computer where my application is running to be on every time. Okay, and for this we need we need always on internet connection and uninterrupted power supplies. Okay, this is happening when the application is deployed. Now everything is working fine, my application is ready, some 5 6 handful people of them are using. Now this handful becomes the entire class. Okay, so I need to think about handling a lot of data. Okay, and then I need to make my application capable of handling multiple requests at the same time. This is where I talk about scaling of application, right? So this all happens with the stages. So week 12 is nothing but week 1 to 10 in a single 2 to 3 points, right? So that's what happens. So when we talk about scaling your application, we think about of whether to increase the power of that particular server when I was where I was hosting my application, or whether to have multiple servers where the crowd or the crowd of requests can be handled or distributed, right? So this is so in scaling you will come across terms like vertical and horizontal scaling, right? So vertical scaling is increasing the power of that particular server, whereas horizontal is increasing the number of same powered servers. Okay, then we have various service approaches. Okay, for example, if I want to create an application, I need to think what level I want to create an application. At what level? I want to begin with what level? Okay, whether I just need a software to create an application, right? Whether I need a platform to create an application or I need an entire infrastructure to create an application. Okay, so talking about the first part, that is platform, when I need only a platform to create an application. So it takes care of the web, right? Our platform to create application for web application is web. So web acts as a platform, and this web is providing me the service of creating an application, a web application. That's why I call it as platform as a service. Okay. So things like Python, Flask, where are these things running? These are running on the web. Running on the web as in I create servers and I host them, and then I use web as a platform of my application. So that's why I call this as platform as a service approach. Okay. I don't want to use a Flask and Python and create an application. I just want to create application from the software itself. Okay, this is where we may have come across terms like Wix, right? Wix. You may have seen various ads of Wix, right? You may have talked about WordPress. Okay, all these things are nothing but they don't really ask you to code anything. They just give you some tools where you can simply put in what you exactly want, you know, drag and drop things and create the application. So what you exactly are doing, you are creating an application and you don't exactly need anything. What do you need? A software and internet connection, right? So this approach of creating application is called software as a service. So what you're taking as a service, only software, right? So that is called as SaaS, software as a service. When I'm talking about Flask and Python and the web as a platform, what am I using? Platform as a service for my application. Okay. After this, if I want to bring the database servers, to put the cloud servers in place, to run my servers from outside machine, everything, deployment. Okay, for example, we use things like Glitch for deployment. So I'm using Glitch for deploying my application. So my application is running to another server. That server using database from another server. I'm using cloud for another information retrieval. So this is nothing but, this is not a simple platform. This is not a simple software, but this is infrastructure as a whole, right? So here I'm not only using platform, but I'm using infrastructure as a service to create my application. All right. So these are different service approaches, right? One is the shortest one, the easiest one, software as a service. Use a Wix, create your application here and there, and it is already hosted because they definitely provide you that. Okay, create the entire application from the scratch with Flask and Python. That is what we have been doing. So what we are doing, we are using you with the help of web. So what we are doing, we are using platform as a service. All right. Apart from that, I'm using my application and I'm deploying my application to various different servers for info. I mean, different servers for different tasks. Different servers for database, different servers for hosting, different servers for managing other stuff, things like that. So I'm using the entire infrastructure to create my application. So this is called as, this service approach is infrastructure as a service. All right. So these are the service approaches that we see for an application while talking about an application. All right. So this is the content of week 12. All right. So with this, I finished the content of entire 12 weeks, and now we'll be able to take questions. Okay. So we can go to any other slide and talk about a particular topic.
Sir, I have a question about the SaaS and everything services.
Yeah.
So can you just please explain that once again, because it's a bit confusing for me.
Yeah. So what I said was, let's say, all right. So while talking about an application, very first week, we saw that there are various platforms of application available, right? So you can create a GUI based application, that is a standalone application, which can be installed and used in the system, right? That is one platform. The platform that we are using our application to run is web, right? That is one platform. You might be using number of applications in your mobile phone, so that are mobile applications. All right. So these are different platforms which help you to create and work with applications. All right. Okay. So these application, these way of creating an application using a platform, what am I doing? I'm using platform for, I'm in a particular platform to create and work with application. So what I'm using, what service I'm using, I'm using platform as a service application approach.
Okay, got it.
Right. So that is a platform as a service. I'm using web as my platform to create and work with application. All right. How am I doing that? I'm using Python. I'm using Flask. Okay. Creating my application from the scratch and using web as a platform where my application will be hosted. Okay. So using platform as a service for your application is nothing but, that approach is called as platform as a service. Okay. PaaS. Now, what is software as a service? Software as a service is using some online software to create your application. Okay, so you may have come across things like Wix, WIX, which is a web application that allows you to create a web application.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're using software, you're not using any Python, Flask. You don't worry about database, you don't worry about deploying it anywhere. It will already be taken care of by that particular software. Okay, so for that application, that kind of application, you're using software as a service approach. Okay. So we're done with PaaS, we're done with SaaS. Now that is infrastructure. Now I'm using web. Okay, so now I have selected a platform. Okay, let's say web. Okay, and I've created my application using Flask and everything. Platform is used. Okay, but with that, when I'm deploying my application, I'm using Glitch. Okay, to deploy my application. Okay, don't go till Glitch. I'll say I'm using Replit. Okay, what is Replit doing? It is allowing me a web a web deployment where I don't have to, where others also can use my application. It is like a proper deployment of application, but I'm using some other application for that. Okay.
So is AWS also an infrastructure
Correct, yeah.
Correct. Okay, got it.
Yeah, because it provides you the database, it provides you cloud, it provides you all the tools from the scratch, and you create your application.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so those are the three different service approaches for creating an application. Now it depends on you what you have to use.
Okay, got it, sir. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So this is the 12-week content. I'll share this slides with you because okay, if we leave out this week 11 and week 12, I guess it gives you good idea of what things you have to look at for as far as the end term is concerned. All right. So yeah. So before we, before I finish my discussion, I just want to you to see that okay, if you have any doubt, we'll discuss on particular topic.
Yeah, it's more of a conceptual doubt.
Yeah.
This is with the templates, right? So there is no way to hide the data structure from the template, right? So typically, suppose I take the data from I take the data from the tables, but when I pass, the field names are known to the template also. Right? Is there any way I can abstract this and say that all the data information is known only to the controller, but not to the template?
Okay. See, yeah, I think so. You can do that. But what will happen? You will be, the use of Jinja templates will be least. Okay. So what happens is, for example, I retrieve an object from the database. Okay. So it is list of objects, let's say. Okay. I retrieve all the entries from the database and it is a list of objects. If I pass this list directly to the templates, I will have to, go through objects one by one, okay, in the template. There, the chance of, spelling out the names, exact names of the database and the content of database is possible. Okay, but if I retrieve this object in the controller and process it within the controller and send only the data that I want, changing the name, and using it in the template will not do that.
That will actually be more code in the controller. Right? There is no easy way to make this abstraction.
Yeah, see something. What happens is there is an object and you want to access a particular attribute of that object. Okay, so that access has to be either done in controller or in the templates itself. Okay, generally we do, we try to simplify code from each, so we evenly distribute the coding part in all the templates and the controllers. But and that's what leaks the data. But if I do this, most of the part in the controller and send only that information which I want it to be rendered, then it becomes I'm not spilling a lot of beans here.
Okay, I understand, because see, I was trying to view the template as simply view, right? And that way the view should not know the database. So of course, in real life, it is not easy to get this clear distinction between the various framework levels.
Yeah, but generally this won't happen because okay, so you see, if you have even if you have the all the Jinja for templates and access of I mean object dot attribute, all these things written in the template, even if you render this, I mean if somebody render it and inspect that page, he will only see the raw HTML. He'll not see the curly braces and all. Actually, I mean he will not see the placeholders. He will only see the actual content.
Okay, I understand.
Okay, what exactly, I mean, who is giving information of the data in the database are the placeholders, but that is not what is rendered or shown in the browser. So the chances are very less.
Okay, I can say that I can view the, I mean, I can consider the template to be more related to the code that generates the view, and the produced HTML file is the actual view.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah, so if you see, I mean, one of the any of your lab assignments, if you see one of the rendered page and right click and inspect it, the HTML content what you see on the browser and the actual template both are different. The one you have on your file editor will have all the placeholders, curly braces and all, but the one on the what we say on the browser will have the actual values. So both are different. Hello.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. All right. Anyone, any issue with whatever I said? Anything that was not clear? Was I fast very much?
No, it was fast actually because we did cover 12 weeks in one session. I thought it may be two sessions, but I think it was quite useful, particularly the facts that you covered, what would be the practical aspects that we have to focus on.
All right. Yeah. So basically, my intent was that, all right, okay, when I open the slides or video lectures of a week, I might see a lot of things, but what exactly do I need? It's not that what I've not mentioned is not required, but I mean, it's like what things you have to pay more attention at is something that I marked out. Okay, so I mean, I've been going through and through, I mean, cut to cut, right, from one end to the other end in the single go. That's why I thought I mean, I may have got fast in between. That's why I was just asking. But if it was okay, it was okay. You can go through this lecture once again if there was any issue, or just go ahead and ask here. All right, I'll share this file as soon as we are done with the session.
Thank you. And you did kind of indicate that typically, many courses we see a larger weightage given to the later weeks, right? Week 9 to 12, because they're not covered in the previous quizzes. But you did give an indication between the difference between week 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. So
yeah, that's what. So see, what happens is, I mean, as so the thing, this is the thing with AppDev 1. What happened is the practical aspect, what we generally see, the code heavy content generally gets finished by week 10. Week 11 and week 12 are like starter packages to your AppDev 2. Okay. It's not that these are, content light weeks. It's only in terms of AppDev 1. Okay. So when you go to AppDev 2, you will see more of this content. I mean, JavaScript, deployment, APIs. This is something that you'll see more. Yeah, but what I highlighted as an important part is actually an important part in terms of questions and in term anytime. This will also help you in AppDev 2 also. So, but if you see here, week 11, I've just given frameworks, front and back end. Okay, I didn't do that because we have the entire course for that. That's why. We'll be, completely working on one framework throughout the course. So it becomes quite detailed. So that's why there wasn't any need to go in details here. And some of the contents like week 12 is like more of theoretical.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the session. I don't have any other questions. Maybe others probably have. I will go ahead and yield
All
the
right.
mic to others.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. So we have got some time. I'll wait for some more time. Yeah, Afnan, go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Yeah.
So this is regarding the testing part. So I was just, it's more of a conceptual question. So I was just trying to understand that when we do the requests library approach to testing the Flask application, what we do is we make the HTTP requests, I mean the raw requests, and then we send it across to the application, and then we get the output and inspect it and do as we want to. I mean, like test whatever we want to test on that. But when we use the client, the test client of the Flask app, as in the case with when we use PyTest, so does that actually involve invoking the HTTP module, or is it without the actual HTTP happening in the background?
It should do. Why? Because your application need to run. If you're anyway want to see, simply sending a test will not give you the result. I mean, simply sending a request to a particular URL will not give the result. Only that application should run.
Okay, that's correct, sir. But from what I read, actually, it was written that that test client actually allows you to test the application without actually running it. So that's why the confusion arises. So I thought it is more of a like what it does, it just invokes the controller themselves without actually invoking a request in between. So the network layer does not happen. That's what I understood. But
Okay,
I
might have to check that. Afnan.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
So
Yeah, but that's a good question because that is something I've never thought about. Okay, so I'll go through it. I'll see what actually happens. If I mean what you're saying is right, then we don't really have to run the application, right? So okay, I'll test that and get back to you.
Sure, sir. Actually, according to what was written, that's what I understood. But I'm also not very sure about that that one actually. So that's why.
All right.
But okay. But if you could, I mean, I'll post that in the discourse forum as well, so that we can have a discussion on that.
Got it. Got it.
All right. Sure, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll just stop sharing. If there is anything you want to ask through the slides, just let me know. I'll go through that slide. Okay, so if there are, yeah, I can see there are 13 people. If there are no doubts, if there are any doubt, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, and we'll try to have a discussion. If there are no doubts, then okay, we can close the session, and I'll share this slide to you. So I
hello,
hope,
sir.
yeah.
Yeah, so how much can we expect from JavaScript? As in, like, JavaScript was there in passing as one screencast lecture. So when we take something like Flask and Jinja, we have the documentation to refer to, and there's a rough idea since you've seen it for so many weeks, like what we can expect. So how much of JavaScript can we expect for this one?
That's what. So while I mean, when I talked about JavaScript in week 8, I said that okay, you need to have a basic of DOM manipulation. That's it. Okay. Again, DOM manipulation is not a small thing, so we'll not go into much details. So just have basics of DOM manipulation. That's it.
All right, as in the basic structure of a small JS script that
correct.
Come for
small JS structure wherein you target how to target document, how to target a particular element using ID, selector, class, right? And then how to change its content. That's it. What we need to understand at this point.
Right, that's clear. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, so I'll wait for a few minutes. I'll just mute. I'm here. I'll wait for a few minutes. If there are any doubts, just go ahead and ask. I don't think so. I mean, is there a requirement of any another session on this? I mean, if there is any particular thing that you want a discussion on, we can have it. All right. So just, I mean, you can, if there is any particular topic that you need to have discussion on, just, create the thread on Discourse. If there are, yeah, that's what. So if there are any particular thing that needs to be discussed and there are upvote for so many students, we'll try to have a session on that. Otherwise, I don't think there is a requirement because I mean you have a lot of content to go through once. I mean again and again if there is any issue.
Sir, there's this sort of a feedback of sorts.
Hmm.
One of the things is that with the bringing of separating of project courses from the theory courses, specifically, there was a lot of doubt, like when I met my peers during the exams or had discussions otherwise. So like many of them just had decided that they're going to do the project after the theory course. So yeah, but then like later I realized, and it was clarified and disclosed by Abhishek. So the thing is that I found that in Mat 2 will be sort of in the subsequent term we'll be working on the project that we have done in this term. So, but if we don't do the project in this term, or if we take Mat 2 in some term other than the next one, then we'll essentially be doing completely two different projects. So I think this is something that a lot of students have not realized, as it was not specifically mentioned in any of the communications. And yeah, I think that would lead to students planning differently in how they're going to take courses as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just saying that since the two subsequent terms of MAD will have work on a similar project, students not knowing that could lead to some sort of issues. And if it was communicated earlier, it would be better, like for subsequent terms.
Okay, yeah. So see, the thing is, why is it? I mean, we generally do that, but why is it? And it's not that is an assumption that okay, you will have a build up on same project in Mat 2. That is not an assumption. We consider both the projects separately. The reason being, all the things required for a Mat 2 and I mean for a project to be called as Mat 2 is a completely different tech stack. Okay, so there are, I mean, MAD 1 project, I mean, the question, most of the question statement remains same, but what is required technically as far as MAD 2 is concerned is completely depending on the MAD 2 course. Okay, so yeah, so we call that, okay, the question statement of MAD 1 project and question statement of MAD 2 project remains same, but that is, you can call it just the name remains same. Everything else changes. All right. So if you go, I mean, if you go through Mat 2 content and you see the way applications are being developed using Mat 2, I mean, the question statement will sound completely different.
Okay. So essentially, what will be judged there for is something that is a completely different tech stack compared to the one we'll be having now.
Yeah, exactly. Some basics. See, there are certain things which can be done by even the knowledge that we have now, and which will be which can also be done by Mat 2 understanding. So those things remain same, but the way you implement them differs. So it is like an entirely different project. Although the question statement and what exactly and the basic functionality remains same.
Okay, and building this sort of like how would it be like something like we'll be doing the same basic stuff that we've done now, and then using all the different technologies that we'll be learning in Mat 2, or is it something from the start that is going to be very different?
It is something in the middle.
All right. Okay. I'll just have to experience that then. Thank you.
Yeah. So you cannot completely distinguish. This is something I've done in Mad 1. This is something there will be some, that's what I've said. There will be some functionalities which you think, okay, the functionality with the help of Mad 1 tech stack is sufficient enough to take it in the Mad 2. But there will be some things, major things, which will be done by the Mad 2 stack. Okay, so the question statement remains same, but there are a lot that can be added.
Right. That makes total sense. Yeah, so, thank you for clearing it.
Correct. So just to add to that, if you are having contact with your current peers and the ones that have completed Mat 2, right? So you can ask them and compare. I mean, what is the difference between, although the question statement remaining same, what is the difference between the two projects?
Sure, I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, so I think there are no more doubts, and we have already come to the end of the session. So I think it would be a good time to end the session if there are no more doubts. If there are any doubt, just put it on Discord. We'll try to clear, and I'll just post. Add this slides to the portal. Okay, so it will be accessible to you. I'll just give a notification when done. Okay, so yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. So we'll officially end this session. Thank you, everyone.